It was supposed to be Brooke's day, but when the dean announced the truth, the whole room went silent. Please join me in recognizing Lauren Mitchell, recipient of the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience. I'm Lauren, and for years I was the invisible one, the one whose hard work never mattered, whose achievements were overlooked, while my sister, the perfect one, took all the credit. But that day, at her graduation, I didn't just walk up for a medal, I walked up to take back everything I had silently earned. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. The seat for my name was empty. It had never been marked. But Brooke's name glimmered in bold, her name shining like the perfect prize, a halo of approval hanging over her that no one questioned, not even when she didn't deserve it. I checked the program 3 times. Like a kid at a birthday party, I searched for my name, desperately tracing each line with my finger, hoping to see the one that would make me visible. But only Brooke stood out, even when she wasn't supposed to be here. Even when I knew, we all knew, she had lied, forged her way through everything, and was about to walk across the stage with the same smiling face she always wore. But it wasn't just her face that haunted me today. It was the fact that no one saw me. Not really. No one saw the years I'd spent working in the shadows, away from the spotlight. I stood there in the back row, feeling the weight of the gown that didn't quite fit right. The hem sagged. The fabric was wrinkled and my hair was hastily pinned up with broken bobby pins. It was almost like a costume, like I didn't belong. But I did. I had earned it. The air felt thick with pride and excitement. The smell of fresh-cut grass swirled around me as the families around me chatted and laughed, their voices a blur of joy. The faint hum of students celebrating filled the space, but none of it was for me. I was here, but not really here. In the program, I saw Brooke's name under Marketing and Brand Innovation with Distinction. Her seat was already marked, right up front like it had always been. I wondered if they even noticed it was empty yet. The program didn't include my name. It didn't even mention me. For a moment, I wondered if I had even made a difference. Did it even matter that I had spent hours in the library and nights working my fingers to the bone in labs? Or was I just a backdrop to Brooke's perfect picture? I tried to push those thoughts away, but they crept back. I had come so far, sacrificed so much for a future that felt more uncertain with each passing day. Still, no one seemed to care. Then I saw the slight movement of the dean's posture at the podium. His hand shifted and suddenly, the world felt a little different. I wasn't sure what to expect, but something was about to change. The dean stepped forward, his voice steady but his eyes scanning the crowd like he was about to announce something that no one was prepared for. "We have a correction," he said, his voice carrying over the microphone. A murmur rippled through the audience. The words didn't quite register at first. "Brooke Hastings," the dean continued, "is not eligible for graduation." Gasps filled the air, like wind sweeping through dry leaves. The applause froze mid-clap. My parents, I could feel them, stopped in their tracks. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I knew what their faces would look like, the sudden shock, the disbelief. "And," the dean continued, "please join me in recognizing Lauren Mitchell, recipient of the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience." A cold rush of air swept through the stadium. The silence was suffocating. I didn't know if I was still breathing or if the weight of what had just happened had paralyzed me. Then, as if on cue, hesitant applause broke out. The sound was scattered, unsure. It wasn't for me, not really. It was for the idea of me, the quiet girl who had somehow made it without anyone noticing. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't need to. I felt the coldness of the air between us, a gap I couldn't bridge anymore. Not after everything. Not after all the years of waiting, hoping they would see me. The applause didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time, I was seen. They celebrated Brooke like a queen, but when it came to me, they only used words like resourceful and self-sufficient. No applause, no recognition. I had earned the scholarship to Whitmore's engineering program, but it was always the same polite, detached comment from my mother. "That's wonderful, Lauren. You always were so resourceful." And that was it. No questions about how I managed to juggle my academics while working 3 jobs. No acknowledgement of the late nights spent in the lab, alone, with nothing but my notes and a cup of stale coffee to keep me going. Brooke's calls were frequent and full of complaints. She called at least twice a week, always complaining about how hard college was for her, how difficult it was to make friends, how stressful it was to find her place in the world. Yet somehow, she always found time for a party, an event, or a shopping spree. And when she wasn't complaining, she was bragging about her perfect life, the internships, the friends, the social media posts documenting every moment of her perfect college experience. But my calls to home were short. "Yes, I'm fine. No, I don't need anything." I wasn't asking for help. I just needed someone to listen, someone to see me, but I never got that. I spent my time with my textbooks, my research papers, and my multiple part-time jobs. I tutored undergrads in calculus, worked at the campus bookstore, and hosted late-night segments at the university radio station. Every job pushed me to my limits, and each job chipped away at my health, both physically and mentally. I ate whatever was left over in the dining hall or what I could heat up on my hot plate hidden in my dorm room. I was too tired to care. There were nights I fell asleep on my textbooks, the numbers and equations swimming in my dreams. But I kept going. I had to. My quiet pride came in small victories. One day, my research on fault-tolerant load-bearing frameworks for coastal bridges was published in the Whitmore Civil Engineering Review. It was a significant milestone, but when I shared the news with my parents, their response was typical. My mother texted back, a single thumbs-up emoji and a brief, "That's great, sweetie." That was it. No questions about my work, no excitement, no congratulations. I had spent weeks working on that paper, perfecting it, making sure every detail was precise. But it didn't matter. Not to them. To them, I was still the girl who was resourceful, the one who didn't need anyone's help, the one who could handle everything on her own. Then came the conference. I presented my research to a room full of faculty, students, and professionals. I stood there, feeling like a small fish in a very big pond, but I pushed through. It wasn't about the attention. It was about proving that my hard work was worth something. When I finished, I looked to my parents, hoping for at least a glimmer of pride in their eyes. But all I saw was indifference. They were too busy talking about Brooke's latest internship, the one she got for marketing, even though she wasn't even enrolled in the program anymore. "She's a natural," my father said, his voice full of admiration. I swallowed hard, the taste of disappointment bitter in my mouth. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I had been overlooked again. I had poured my heart and soul into my academic career, and yet it was always Brooke who got the attention. It was always Brooke who was the star of the family, the one who could do no wrong. I realized then that my value in their eyes had never been about my achievements. It was always about how much I could do for them, how much I could carry on my own without needing anyone's help. I had become a tool for their convenience, a quiet source of pride when it was needed, but nothing more. When I emailed my parents about my paper being published, I tried to hide the frustration in my words. I told them how proud I was, how excited I felt to finally be recognized for my hard work. But when the response came, it was the same as always, polite, detached, and empty. My mother sent a brief, "Good for you, Lauren." And just like that, the little hope I had been holding on to faded. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep waiting for them to notice me. I wasn't going to beg for their recognition anymore. "I'm just here to do the work," I told myself quietly as I closed my laptop. I was tired, but tired wasn't the same as broken. Brooke's false facade was about to crumble, but Lauren knew the truth, and sometimes silence spoke louder than words. It was always like this with Brooke. Everything was perfect on the surface. The pictures on Instagram, the perfectly posed selfies, the flawless college experience she broadcasted to everyone. But Lauren could see what no one else could. She'd been in the background long enough to notice the cracks in the story, the lies that no one else seemed to care to see. I didn't expect them to notice. I never did. But I couldn't ignore it anymore, Lauren thought as she sat in the quiet, dimly lit lab, the hum of the machines filling the silence. She was used to this solitude. She preferred it. Here there were no distractions, no one pulling her in different directions like they did with Brooke. She had her work and her research, and that was enough for her, or so she told herself. But she knew things were about to change. It was graduation season, and with it, the final chapter of her college career. Lauren had worked tirelessly for every grade, every piece of research, while Brooke had coasted through on lies and manipulation. Lauren had heard the whispers in the faculty lounge, the subtle remarks made by professors when they thought no one was listening. One evening, as Lauren sat in the lab, going over data for her latest project, she overheard a conversation between two faculty members passing by the open door. "I heard Abigail Hastings didn't even take the classes she listed on her resume," one said, voice dropping to a whisper. "I looked up her transcripts. Half of those summer courses were never enrolled in." The other professor nodded. "It's all a game to her, isn't it? I'm sure her parents still think she's on track for graduation, but we both know the truth." Lauren's heart skipped a beat as the words sank in. Brooke had been faking it all along. The grades she had given their parents, the summer courses, even the internships, none of it was real. It was all a web of lies. And Lauren had known. She had seen the subtle signs, the missed classes, the assignments left undone, the sudden bursts of emergencies that kept Brooke away from her studies. But Lauren had stayed quiet, not because she was afraid, but because she had come to accept the silence. She had always been the shadow, the quiet, diligent one who worked behind the scenes while Brooke lived in the spotlight. But now it was clear. Brooke's carefully crafted image was about to fall apart. Lauren's internal struggle weighed heavily on her. She could expose Brooke, lay bare everything she had uncovered. It would shatter the family, break the fragile ties that had always been strained. But Lauren knew that would be the final straw. The illusion of the perfect family would crumble, and there would be no going back. She had seen the devastation that would follow, the anger, the blame, the disappointment. So, she made a choice. She would remain silent, not because she was weak, but because she understood the consequences of speaking up. The truth could wait. It had always waited, hadn't it? As the graduation ceremony approached, Lauren's thoughts turned to the day of the event. She knew exactly where Brooke would sit, front and center, as always, soaking in the adoration of their parents and the faculty. But when Lauren walked into the ceremony, it was different. She didn't look for Brooke. She didn't care to see her. Instead, she walked past the front row of graduates where Brooke's seat remained empty, a stark reminder of the life Brooke had built on lies. Lauren felt her heartbeat in her throat as she moved past the empty seat. This wasn't anger. It was resignation. The weight of everything, years of effort, years of being ignored, years of being overlooked, settled in her chest. But for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't need to be seen by anyone else. Her worth wasn't tied to their approval. It was tied to what she had built for herself. For the first time in her life, Lauren felt the quiet strength she had been carrying all along. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Not anymore. The murmurs started first. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a soft current, but they didn't make sense. A few heads turned, and others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Confusion spread like wildfire, and then the truth sliced through the air like a clean blade. The dean stepped forward, his hand clutching the microphone with a slight tremor that no one noticed at first. "This is a correction," he said, his voice unusually steady, almost too steady. There was a brief pause, as if he was making sure everyone could hear him, And then, one of our previously listed candidates is not eligible for graduation. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. Parents exchanged confused glances. Students whispered. The whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder. The camera panned over the audience, focusing briefly on my parents. Diane and Tom were sitting up straight, their faces glowing with pride as they glanced at each other, pleased by what they assumed would be the next announcement. But the pride quickly vanished from their faces. The shock was evident. Their smiles faltered. Their hands, once clasped tightly together, now lay limp in their laps. And then, the moment of truth, the moment I had long been waiting for. Please join me in recognizing Lauren Mitchell, recipient of the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience. The words hit like a thunderclap. The crowd reacted with a tentative applause, uncertain at first, hesitant, as if they didn't know whether to cheer or hold back. The air was thick with discomfort. The silence that followed felt like it could swallow the room whole. I didn't wait for anyone to finish clapping. I didn't wait for anything. I stood from my seat, feeling the weight of all the years I'd spent waiting for this moment. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else's validation. I wasn't waiting for them to see me. I was walking toward my own truth, and no one else's opinion mattered anymore. As I walked down the aisle, I felt the eyes of the crowd on me, but I didn't look at them. I didn't look at my parents, who were still sitting there in stunned silence, their faces frozen in disbelief. I didn't look at Brooke, who sat at the front of the room, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to fall apart. My footsteps echoed in the quiet room. The path ahead was clearer than it had ever been. I didn't need to be seen by them. I had already left them behind in my heart. When I reached the stage, the Chancellor placed the medal around my neck. It felt heavier than I expected, but it wasn't just the weight of the medal. It was the weight of everything that had led me here. The sleepless nights, the endless hours spent alone, the rejection, the silence. The applause that followed was scattered, but I didn't care. It wasn't for me. It wasn't meant for me. It was meant for everyone who had watched from the sidelines as I quietly built my own path. I didn't look back. I felt the silence from my parents like a stone in my chest. But it didn't matter. I had already left them behind. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their recognition. I had finally found my own. When they asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" It wasn't because they cared. It was because they couldn't bear the truth staring them in the face. Their perfect little world, the one they had built around Brooke and her flawless image, was falling apart, and they were too afraid to admit it. The ceremony was over. The crowd had started to thin, and the campus felt quieter than it had all day. The students were leaving in clusters, their laughter and chatter fading as they walked toward their next adventure. But Lauren remained behind, standing by the fountain in the center of the quad, watching the world move on without her. The water splashed softly in the background, but Lauren's mind was far away. She had never expected this day to be anything like she had imagined. She hadn't imagined it at all, really. All those years of hard work, the sacrifices, the nights spent alone in the lab, the constant reminder that her family didn't see her, hadn't noticed her, not in the way they noticed Brooke. Lauren's fingers curled tightly around the medal she still wore, feeling the cool metal against her skin. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Her parents approached, walking slowly as though they weren't sure whether they should be happy or disappointed. Diane and Tom's faces showed the same mix of guilt and anger. They weren't angry at themselves. No, that would have been too much to ask. They were angry at the situation, at Lauren's defiance, at the way their world had cracked apart. And maybe they were angry at the truth. Diane stopped a few feet away from Lauren, her eyes searching her daughter's face like she was trying to piece together a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Why didn't you tell us?" Diane asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lauren didn't flinch. She didn't have to. This question wasn't about the truth. It was about their failure to see it. "I did," Lauren replied, her voice calm, controlled. "You just weren't listening." Tom opened his mouth to respond, but Lauren didn't wait for him. "That's not what we're talking about," he insisted, his tone defensive. Lauren looked at him, steady. "You're talking about embarrassment. I'm talking about patterns." Her words hung in the air, sharp and clear, cutting through the silence that had settled over them. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not a confrontation, but a declaration of who she had become. She wasn't the girl who needed their approval anymore. She wasn't the one who had to fight for a place in their eyes. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. Brooke, standing off to the side, tried to hide behind her perfect smile, as though she hadn't heard a thing. But Lauren didn't look at her. This wasn't about Brooke anymore. It never had been. Lauren took the Chancellor's medal off her neck slowly, the weight of it heavy in her hands. She held it out in front of her parents, her fingers gripping the medal tightly. "This medal belongs to every sleepless night I spent in the lab," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It belongs to every time I sacrificed sleep for research, every time I worked through lunch, through dinner, through everything. It's for the times you never noticed, because you were too busy praising her." She nodded at Brooke, whose expression had shifted from a proud smirk to one of unease. But Lauren didn't care. She was done trying to win their approval, their love, their attention. She had done it all on her own, and she would continue to do it on her own. Brooke opened her mouth to say something to defend herself, but Lauren held up a hand, silencing her. "No," Lauren said, her tone unwavering. "You don't get to deflect anymore. Not today. Not with me." The words were out there, spoken and real. And in that moment, the weight that Lauren had carried for so long began to lift. She wasn't going to hold it anymore. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the silence that had to happen, the silence that had been building for years. And as Lauren turned to walk away, she knew that she wasn't going to wait anymore. She wasn't going to wait for them to understand, for them to apologize, for them to notice. It didn't matter anymore. She had already started her own life, and this time she didn't need them to see it. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I had already left their world. But the letter that arrived a few weeks later proved something I already knew. I had finally become unignorable. It wasn't anything dramatic, no grand gesture or moment of revenge. It was just the quiet certainty that I was now building my own path, far away from the one they had tried to push me down. I didn't need their approval, not anymore. The email from Diane was typical. It wasn't an apology, nor was it a true expression of support. It was just an update about refinancing the house, about how they were finally figuring out how to make the mortgage payments. It was always like that. They never truly acknowledged the depth of what I had gone through, the years of fighting for a place in a family that had no room for me unless I was invisible. But this email, this simple acknowledgement of their own struggles, was a reminder. I didn't need them to understand me. I didn't need them to validate my efforts anymore. But still, there was that little piece of me that couldn't completely shut off. That little voice that wanted to hear them say, "I'm proud of you." The same voice that had been asking for recognition for so long. But I knew that voice had to be quieted. It wasn't for them to give. It was for me to create. My first day at the civil engineering startup was a breath of fresh air. The office felt more like home than my old dorm had ever felt. The building was tucked in between the city's skyline and the docks, the Pacific Northwest air crisp and filled with the scent of salt water and trees. The energy of the place buzzed in the way that only a startup could, new, alive, full of ideas and possibilities. I wasn't just another cog in the machine here. I was part of something I had built from the ground up, something that mattered. I wasn't here to blend into the background. I was here to make my mark. Later that week, another postcard arrived from Brooke. It was the same as all the others, posed, perfect, curated. She was standing on the balcony of a beach house, hair blowing in the wind, a smile plastered on her face, like everything was fine. She was living her dream, or at least the dream she had carefully constructed for everyone to see. The postcard was a reminder of how far apart we had drifted. The life she was leading had no place for me, and frankly, I didn't have the energy to care anymore. The family dynamic, the endless cycle of her lies and their approval, it no longer affected me. I had already stepped away. Then came the letter from the university. It was unexpected, a formal invitation for me to speak at the alumni event during homecoming. I had never imagined that I would be invited back, especially not for something like this. But as I read the letter, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about my accomplishments, it was about the fact that I had done it without them, without anyone's approval but my own. At the alumni event, the inevitable question came. A nervous freshman, wide-eyed and hopeful, asked me, "Do you ever wish your family had noticed you earlier?" I didn't hesitate. "No," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I just wish I had stopped waiting sooner." The crowd was silent for a moment, and then a few people nodded, some smiling. The truth was simple, but the weight of it felt like it had been waiting to be said for years. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone. Later that evening, I found myself back at the fountain on campus, the one where so many students had left their marks. It had been years since I had seen it, but somehow it felt like the right place to mark this moment. I pulled a piece of chalk from my bag and bent down. 3 simple letters, CH. I smiled softly to myself. For the first time in my life, those letters were mine and mine alone. No one could erase them. No one could change what they meant. As I stood there, brushing the chalk dust from my hands, I realized something. This was my life now. The past, the family, the years spent in silence, they were behind me. And for the first time, I was unignorable. Looking back on my journey from the days spent in the shadows to the moment I stepped into the light, I realized one thing. I no longer needed them to see me. I had carved out my own path. And in that silence, I found my true strength. Sometimes, the most precious gift we can offer each other is simply listening and understanding. If we learn to appreciate and acknowledge each other's struggles, perhaps there wouldn't be those invisible gaps between us. Everyone has their own story, but perhaps the most important thing is not that others hear us, but that we learn to understand ourselves. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Life may have its challenges, but who knows? Love might always find a way to return.